Good evening, party members, affiliates, viewers, and political family. Welcome to the regular Wednesday broadcast of the Workers' Party of Britain. We're here every week with party member contributions and for questions. So without further ado, let me introduce our party leader, walking political encyclopedia, George Galloway.
Thank you so much, Tess. Your introductions are most kind, and I'm very grateful to all who've tuned in live and all who will watch this later, both from within the party and from those that we hope to recruit to the party, this fastest growing party in Britain. We have many things to discuss tonight, and I'll be as brief as possible on every one of them, because I want to allow the maximum time for questions. The first thing I want to raise is an international matter that I touched on only the other week, and there's been an important development. I refer, of course, to the new liberal cause célèbre, Alexei Navalny, who has not been, like Julian Assange, incarcerated for 10 years, or like Julian Assange, if found guilty in the United States, incarcerated in a maximum security jail for 160 years. No, Alexei Navalny has been sentenced to 2 years in prison. With time off for good behavior, he'll be out in about 15 months, which is quite a lenient punishment for the crime of breaking his probation, which was itself a lenient sentence for a man who embezzled substantial sums of money from a French company that he was working for. He has a lot of foreign patrons and paymasters, of course, the more by the day. But he embezzled money, not from the Russians, not from a Russian company, but from a French company that was paying him. And he was sentenced to probation for it. And he then broke the terms of the probation and has now been punished for doing so with a prison sentence of 2 years. Now, as I mentioned to you last time, I need to underscore this. Alexei Navalny, if he was in Britain, would have been deplatformed long ago by the social media companies who now lionize him. If he was in Britain running around with the EDL, which he probably would be for reasons that I have just, that I will mention in a minute, if he was one of Tommy Robinson's mates hanging outside courts, filming people going in, identifying people and so on, he would have been deplatformed, non-personed. He would be a zero in British public life. If he was in America, he'd be a member of the Proud Boys, but with substantially less public support. I don't know what the public support for the Proud Boys is, but I'm ready to guess it's more than 3%, which is what Navalny got the last time he stood for election. Alexei Navalny is a primitive caveman nationalist, nativist, a man who believes and openly states that Russia is for the Russians. And by Russians, he doesn't mean anyone merely born in Russia, but who looks like him and was born in Russia. He stands for the ethnic cleansing from Russia of all the people from the former republics of the Soviet Union. And the darker they are, the more Asiatic, Caucasian they look, the faster they need to be got out of town. And he's not particularly fastidious when it comes to how they are to be run out of town. On his own video channel, you can, this night, watch him talk about the people of the republics, the Asian republics, Central Asian republics, formerly of the Soviet Union, who Of course, in the Soviet times, people moved all over the place. And of course, millions of them are in Russia and add greatly to the culture, the cuisine, and of course, the labor force in Russia. He describes them on his own video channel, in his own videos, as cockroaches. That's what he called them, cockroaches. And he pondered, what if the cockroach is proving too difficult to dispose of? And he then pulls a gun, a real gun, from his pocket and says, in that case, I recommend a gun. And finally, for all of these reasons, Amnesty International have this evening de-recognized him as a prisoner of conscience. They have removed him from their list of prisoners of conscience because of his advocacy of discriminatory views and his advocacy of violence. Now, fair dues, top marks to Amnesty for belatedly doing this. I shan't dwell on how they ever imagined such a man was a prisoner of conscience in the first place, a thief, a convicted thief from a French company that was employing him. I'm not sure where the conscience is in that, but fair dues. They have now taken him off their list of prisoners of conscience. But what of the rest of the literati, the liberalati, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the BBC, that have treated us to endless coverage of a man that's been sentenced to 2 years in prison in Russia? Because on the same day that Amnesty de-recognized Navalny, the European Union announced that they were imposing a whole new range of sanctions on Russia because of the imprisonment of Navalny, a man that Amnesty says openly advocates racism, discrimination, and violence. And lo and behold, I'm not sure which of the blind was leading the blind. Joe Biden says in the White House that he'll be following suit. They obviously didn't get the memo from Amnesty International and continue to portray as a Spartacus a man who is a rancid racist and an advocate of the most brutal violence. So I wanted to update you on the Navalny case, not because it is important in itself, particularly, but because it indicates the lie machine that the British media has become, where people who'd never heard of Navalny before, who, if he was at their dinner table, evincing the kind of views that he plasters all over YouTube, would ask him to leave. If he was in Scotland, he'd be charged under the new hate crimes bill. People who had never heard of him, would never give him house room, are suddenly talking about Navalny like they knew anything about the internal politics of Russia. And if pressed, advocating the very sanctions that the EU are considering from today. It's a very salutary, sobering example, not just of how we struggle against the baseless slander, endless slander of whoever the enemy of the day is. And this is important too. Have any of you heard anything recently about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? Whatever happened to that? Only 12 months ago, there was no other story in British politics but that. Who's been expelled? How did they extirpate this hideous menace from the ranks of the Labour Party and from British public life? Who now hears anything at all about any of these cause célèbres that are dragged out to confuse us. The Skripal case, for example. Where are the Skripals? Why is no one asking that? Why is no journalist keen to interview the Skripals? Why was the Skripal house able to be knocked down? Knocked down after police officers stood outside it for weeks, stood inside it for weeks. What about all the absolutely contradictory facts in the Skripal story? What about the fact that the would-be assassins stayed in an East London hotel the night before they went to Salisbury, and traces of Novichok were found in their hotel? But nobody told the maids, nobody told the other guests, and the hotel is still operating perfectly normally. So the Skripal house had to be knocked down, but the hotel that the assassins had their Novichok in continues to operate as a hotel. It's this kind of nonsense, as if we were idiots, is dragged out in front of us time after time after time as a look over there maneuver, as a maneuver to bamboozle us, either into hating the enemy of the day. I'm just finishing now the last ribbons and bows for my Killing Kelly film. Who any longer talks about the non-existent weapons of mass destruction on which we launched an earth-shaking war, the reverberations of which continue to this day in Iraq, throughout the Arab world, and everywhere in the world? If some hideous atrocity, mass murder takes place in some parts of the world, what part will the fake war on Iraq have played in the fanaticization, the extremization of the perpetrators? But nobody talks about it anymore, is my point. Tony Blair is back in government. He's advising Matt Hancock, the health secretary, on how we should develop a route map, a roadmap, a plan to get out of the coronavirus. I hope it's better than the roadmap that he devised in his capacity as the Middle East peace envoy. You see the point I'm making? They just flit from one subject, one canard, to another. And the people responsible for it are still in their jobs, are still the intelligence people, the political class, the media barons, the editors, the columnists, the op-ed men and women that told us all these lies about all these things have just moved on to another subject to try and bamboozle us with. I always used to joke, it's not that much of a joke, but the only 3 people that lost their jobs as a result of the Iraq war were Greg Dyke, who's in my film, the former head of the BBC, Piers Morgan, the former editor of the Daily Mirror, and me. We were the only 3 that lost our jobs over the Iraq war. All the people that told all the lies, made all the blunders, committed all the crimes, are all still there. Unlucky for them, I've got a very good memory, so every time I see or read or hear about one of them, I remind people of the role that they played. I did it this week with The Observer, which put up Will Hutton to tell us that Starmer had captured the mood of the nation. That's what he said. That was the headline. Starmer has captured the mood of the nation. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. Farmer Starmer, as I now call him, because he's about to appear in front of the National Farmers Union. A man less rustic, less rural. It's difficult to imagine. But Farmer Starmer is doing all kinds of peculiar things to try and show the extent to which he's captured the mood of the nation. One thing is for sure, he'll not be going to Liverpool anytime soon. Have you followed the farce of the Labour selection for the candidate for mayor of Liverpool? A vacancy created only because the current mayor of Liverpool, the Labour mayor, Joe Anderson, is either in jail or on bail or headed for jail or out on bail. I don't know what his current status is, but he's been investigated by the police throughout his entire term as the mayor of Liverpool. Now, you would have thought, given the disgrace in which the Labour mayor's tenure is coming to an end, that Labour would have been particularly keen to pick a candidate who went with the grain of the great people of Liverpool, who could be a people's champion, who could turn the page for the party from these corrupt individuals that are now leaving office. Not a bit of it. First of all, they instituted their usual tactic of an all-woman shortlist to make sure that none of the men that might have been any kind of challenge to Keith Starmer in Labour politics could not apply. So then they drew up a shortlist of 3 women, an approved shortlist of 3 women. And just when it looked like the woman, a woman of colour, a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn and supported by Jeremy Corbyn, was going to win the nomination out the park, they have dramatically collapsed the whole thing and ruled out the 3 women that they had earlier ruled in onto the shortlist. These 3 women that were running for the position are now persona non grata. Before very long, they'll be suspended and expelled unless they accept their fate and go quietly. So Starmer is going to impose some stooge picked mainly for their fidelity to Farmer Starmer's view of the country and of the world, capturing the mood of the nation. Now, I said this last week. I must repeat it. To Labour Party members watching this, and many do, how long are you going to put up with this? How long are you going to justify giving your money to Farmer Starmer, giving your loyalty, your efforts, your energy? We're coming out now of lockdown, and they'll be asking you to deliver leaflets for Farmer Starmer's mayoral candidate in Liverpool, or Farmer Starmer's mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who's made such a fist of this job over the last 5 years. How long are you going to do that for? How long are you going to pretend to yourself that that counts as fighting for socialism? In what sense is that stay and fight? Stay and fight to get a good mayor of Liverpool until Starmer closes it down and forbids you to select a candidate of your choice. How long? How much longer are you going to do this? Now, of course, I hope that you'll join the Workers' Party, but the very least you have to do is leave the Labour Party. If you're a trade unionist, the very least you've got to do is stop funding all of this. My Union Unite is giving millions of pounds to these people, while Our members are being booted out of the Labour Party, stopped from becoming candidates for public office. I mean, at least Dick Turpin wore a mask. Farmer Starmer does not. He has no need. He can commit this grand larceny of trade union money and the robbery of the dreams of so many decent socialist people in the Labour Party. So defund it. Stop giving your money to them. Leave the Labour Party. And of course, I urge you to take a good look at the Workers' Party, our style of work, our identity, our posture on international and national issues, the growth that we have experienced, phenomenal growth in just 14 or 15 months, thousands of people, scores of branches in every part of the country, and scores of candidates standing in the local elections, in the Welsh Synod elections, in the Scottish Parliament elections. The Workers' Party is everywhere. I see from videos produced by our excellent guerrilla journalists amongst our ranks who are on picket lines and filming the trade union actions that they're on. And you can look at our website, you can see what we stand for, and just as importantly, what we do. I mean, standing for something doesn't mean all that much if all it is words on a virtual page on a website. We live our politics, even in the time of the coronavirus. We hold meetings like this every week and more. We have political education work going on all the time. We're preparing for elections. We're on picket lines. When we can, we'll be on protests and demonstrations and delegations. We are a party of action as well as words, though the words are not too bad either. Finally, I want to make a comment on the election regulations because I introduced this subject last week. To their credit, the British government have responded and they have issued exemptions from the coronavirus regulations for those that are involved in electioneering from the 8th of March, which is not long distant. From the 8th of March in England, you will be allowed to deliver leaflets. You'll be allowed to canvass. You'll be allowed to hand out leaflets in the streets from the 8th of March. And we'll be doing all of those things. And you're allowed to, someone's allowed to use their house as a committee room, and people can come to the house to pick up leaflets and so on, observing all the sensible social distancing and PPE and the rest. We're not idiots about this subject. It's real, the coronavirus. We have to be careful. But that is a tremendous shot in the arm for us in England. But guess what? There are elections in Scotland which arguably, well, not more than arguably, are definitely, obviously, even more important than the elections in England. After all, doesn't matter who wins the London mayoralty, London isn't going to leave Britain. But the clash north of the border, in which I and my colleagues are deeply involved, does raise existential questions about the continued existence of the country. The separatists win, we'll be off down the road to Catalonia at best, and the north of Ireland at worst. So the Scottish elections could scarcely be more important. But we have no lifting of the restrictions on electioneering in Scotland. None. Now, I'm saying this to you now, unless the Scottish government lifts restrictions on people in the Scottish parliamentary elections, I'm going to follow the British government's regulations. And you can arrest me if you must. But I'm not going to allow an election to take place where, as a candidate, as a leading candidate, I'm not allowed to put leaflets through people's doors. I'm not allowed to put my soapbox up in an open space in a shop car park. What kind of mug would I be if I allowed an election to be stolen like that? So I hope the Scottish Parliament can do their normal, make it more Scottishy, put a kilt around it, but issue the same kind of lifting, the same kind of exemption for election campaigning. But if they do not, then I'm afraid my loyalty to democracy is greater than my loyalty to the here today, gone tomorrow, maybe literally gone tomorrow Scottish government. An election's too important to allow it to be stolen. So I'll have my soapbox out and my speaking equipment will be over my shoulder. And I'll be seeking people's votes to save the unity of our small island in the interests of the working people most of all. Thanks very much for listening. Over to you, Tess. Any questions?
Thank you, George. I wasn't aware that politics could be so fun. Farmer Starmer. He did catch the mood of the nation because, you know, depression and despair is current, isn't it? But we're going to change all that. It's time for change. Right, our first speaker this evening is Chris Hawes. He's going to have a chat with us about the Remington Valley campaign. Can you unmute there, Chris?
Am I unmuted?
Hi, we got you.
Hi, Chris.
Yeah. Hello, George. Hello, Tess, and hello to all our comrades listening. Rimrose Valley is the name of the campaign by ours. It was started to oppose a road that is going to be built through a nature park in South Sefton. Which is it wants to be built by Peel Ports and Highways England, despite there being a large public opposition to it in the area, and lots of alternatives have been suggested, including reopening a railway, using the canals and river for freight to the ports, and high-tech mass movement systems such as overhead container transfer. I'm involved in a small way with the campaign. I've been handing out leaflets, cleaning up litter in the park. And me and another comrade, CJ, have been in touch with the main organiser of the campaign, and he welcomes the support of our party. Most of the information about the campaign is on their website, which is Save Rimrose Valley. And there's a petition there you can sign if anybody wants to. And I think how we can help as a party with this issue is we can, people in the local area who are members can join protests, which will be starting again after the lockdown. And as a socialist party, we want to nationalise transport and have a fully integrated transport system, which I think would lead to any kind of distribution links around the docks. It'd be much easier to implement if you had an integrated transport system, and that's something that the campaign hasn't mentioned, but it's something that we as a party are in favour of. The name of the petition is it's Save Rimrose Valley. I'll type in the link to the website if you want to have a look at it. That's all I've got to say. What do you think about that?
Well, thanks for that. I don't know all the details. I know the details about the park, of course, because you've given them. I don't know what the implications for the docks are. I'd like to see that first before I committed myself. Obviously, in all of these matters, we have to balance the environmental issues with the jobs and the economic impact of things on particularly a workforce which has been decimated over decades. The Merseyside docks were once majestic, employing scores of thousands of people, and that's no longer true, of course. But good luck to you. I hope you can do everything you can, and your friends in the area. I wish them success in highlighting the need for parkland, particularly parkland amongst urban dereliction and poverty and alienation that clearly exists now in Liverpool after decades of economic rundown by governments of both parties. We stand with the people of Liverpool. We stand with the workers of Liverpool, and we want to help the trade unions that continue to represent the working class in Liverpool. So let's just get a reading on it from the trade unions, from Unite, the other unions in the docks. But I take my hat off to your activism. Well done, you.
Thanks, George, and thank you, Chris. Chris is going to be joining our environmental policy group on our meetings on Friday evenings, so that'll be really interesting. We can get some updates on that and do some poking around and some research. So that's brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Okay, next up we have George Dragon. Okay, George, can you unmute there, Dal? We got you.
Good evening, all. Good evening, all.
George, great to see you again, son.
Great to see you. Yeah, so the reason I wanted to speak tonight was about censorship. It's something that I've been quite vocal about in the past. As some of the other members do know, I actually got deplatformed from Twitter quite a few times, this time in a permanent way. And that kind of led me to having to jump onto things like Telegram. And then I ended up having an issue with Telegram getting censored on there for questioning the leaders' links with the World Economic Forum. Pretty simple stuff. It's just out there in the public. Anyway, I ended up getting kind of censored from there, and it made me really, really start worrying that even the kind of bastions of free speech seem to be getting affected by this massively authoritarian shift I've noticed. And I definitely think that we as a party definitely need to start kind of speaking up about, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and, you know, because I'm seeing a lot of this kind of, I don't know, it's almost, I don't want to say Orwellian, because, you know, a lot of people always say that kind of thing, but it just seems like, you know, you say the wrong things, cancel culture comes for you, and the fact that they're silencing every type of voice that speaks up against the establishment, whether it's on the left or on the right, doesn't even seem to matter. It's just if you're saying something that the government doesn't like, they're going to find a way of shutting you down and making sure you don't get that message out there. And I think it's definitely massively increased over the last year. There's been so many things, I mean, especially with all the, you know, crazy COVID conspiracies going around, that was a good chance for them to say, okay, we need to put a lid on this. And it seems like whilst they put a lid on, you know, the really out there things, they used it as a chance to put a lid on anything that they see as a form of dissent. So yeah, I just think as a party, we really should be out there kind of looking at alternatives, not just on social media, but I mean, in general, you know, because obviously we need to make sure that people's voices don't just get muffled just because they don't like what's being said.
Sure. Well, we are, of course. I speak about it all the time. I've spoken about it in these broadcasts, in my mother of all talk shows. I regularly deal with it, and I highlight it on social media every chance I get. And I think we all do. These are very, very difficult times, and too many useful idiots lent themselves to the suppression of everybody to the right of them or everyone to the left of them, and ended up surprised when the crocodile kept on eating. And so it's vital. I did an RT short on it that got hundreds of thousands of views. It is vital that we defend the right of everyone to speak. This is, after all, they call it a market economy. Let 1,000 flowers bloom and let every school of thought contend, and let the public decide who they want to listen to. I add only this codicil, please don't take this the wrong way. We have to be careful we don't make it easy for the authorities to ban us. We have to think twice before tweeting and putting out messages. If this idea that I want to express can perhaps be expressed a little differently, it will make it more difficult for the censor to crack down on me. I'm dismayed that you've now fallen out with Telegram. I don't know what leader you were talking about and their links to the World Economic Forum. Was it the leader of Telegram, you mean?
Yeah, I think that was the guy who created Telegram, I think is who he was referring to.
Yeah, Pavel Durov. He actually has a listing on their website as a member. And so it's not as if he's trying to hide it. So all I was doing was just questioning in his kind of main chat, you know, what his links were, just because it kind of seemed to go against his whole kind of character. And yeah, just from that, I ended up being censored from public chats. And that's when I started thinking, oh no, not Telegram as well. So yeah.
Well, that is a pity. But my point stands that we should be very careful not to make it easier for the censors, make it as difficult as possible, so that when if action is threatened or taken, we can have the maximum number of people on our side. I caution against getting involved in fights with other people, because that often leads to temperatures rising, rhetoric sharpening, and then people being closed down. I've seen that happening. There's no profit in having bitter fights with people on Twitter. That's not what I use Twitter for. I use it as a notice board for the ideas I want to get out there. It's not a debating society. I don't have time for a debating society. So if someone quite clearly is not the sort of person I'm going to be able to influence, then I move on and mute and even block if necessary. Well, anyway, good to see you, George. I hope that you get back in fully functioning form on Telegram at least. Thanks very much.
Yeah, good to see you, George Dragon. Yeah, thanks, George. I suppose things have changed a lot for you, because years ago you didn't get seen or heard unless you were on the telly, you know, and then you had to be put on the telly, and you were being sort of, your landline was perhaps being hacked, and you'd hear a little click and a buzz from some guy creeping around outside with some machines doing. But now, I mean, anyone can talk, anyone can listen. So we've just, you know, there's always people are going, well, didn't Kermit get cancelled the other day?
Kermit's a racist.
So, okay, right. Well, we've got Gareth coming next. Gareth Maybury. He's going to talk about Wales and nationalism, I think. Have we got you there, Gareth?
Can you hear me? Am I
Hi,
through?
Gareth. Yeah,
Hi there, George. I'd like to say first, I'm happy to be a new member. It's fine to have a party that actually speaks to working man like myself.
excellent. Welcome on board.
I started with the rest, now I'm with the best. Let's say it that way.
Excellent.
Yeah, just as you were saying earlier on, in May, we've got these Senedd elections coming up, of course.
Yeah.
And there's a rising independent sentiment on the left of the country. And I was wondering, A, how could we combat that? Because I find it to be quite exclusionary. It's, to be honest, seeing some of the statements, we always get the Wales versus England banter when the rugby's on, and I enjoy that more than anyone. But it's devolving into almost racism now to our brothers across the border. So that's A, how do we combat that? And B, what should the role of the Senedd be, you think, these days? Does it serve a role like it should?
Well, I think it was only established by a very tiny majority in the referendum that set it up in 99, I think, or 98. It was wafer thin majority in setting it up. And it's clear that Labour, the Labour Party in Wales, is, as it's always been, a bastion of right-wing Labour politics, and that is less and less popular with the younger people, in particular, people who see themselves as having a radical outlook. The last outfit in the world they're going to join is the Welsh Labour Party. It was ever thus, but it's more than ever thus now. And so Plaid sometimes play left cards, but their project is a thoroughly reactionary one and would be absolutely ruinous for the working class people in Wales. I know Tess doesn't like me putting it as bluntly as this, but the idea of Welsh separatism is faintly ridiculous. The idea that Wales as a separate country could prosper is a ridiculous notion. It would lead to economic ruin, even beyond the economic depredation that has occurred in Wales, in all parts of Wales, over the last few decades. It would become a satrapy of the European Union, but only after it was able to join the European Union, which would be many years. And those years would have to be used by the government of a separatist Wales to effectively decimate the entire public sector, because if Scotland has a deficit that it would have to reduce by 2/3, I don't know the number, but I'm willing to bet that the Welsh deficit is very considerably higher. So there would be no public sector left in Wales. There would be no public services. There would be mass unemployment and immiseration. And all for what? So Plaid Cymru can wave a flag, so you can run one flag down on the flagpole and run another one up. There would be a carnival of reaction would follow such an economic disaster. And of course, a mass exodus of people and businesses out of Wales into England. So it is a ridiculous idea, and it can only be engineered by the kind of racism that you have identified. You've got to blame the English for the problems of Wales, when, of course, the real reason for the problem of Wales is the same reasons that we have problems in so many parts of England, including London, namely the economic and political system that we have in this country. It's not a question of flags or borders or boundaries. It's a question of politics and ideology, of who owns everything, for whom is the system operating. So we have to resist and reject the increasingly xenophobic, chauvinistic, racist arguments for separatism, but we, at the same time, point out to people the kind of Britain we are fighting for. We're fighting for a Britain that would have no need to break up, in which there would be no argument about breaking up, because we'd all be, for the first time, in one boat heading in the right direction, and no one would want to jump out of it. We stand for a socialist Britain, where nationalism is an obscurantist diversion and noises off somewhere, and increasingly less voluble. So welcome to the Workers' Party. We are a family. There's no difference between you and me other than of accent, but there's plenty of difference of accent in Wales itself. We read the same things, listen to the same things, watch the same things, follow the same sports. We have a common economic and cultural interests, and we have a common piece of territory. We are a historically constituted group of people on this island, and breaking it up, dividing people one from the other on the basis of a flag and a border is absolutely anathema to us.
You can put it blunt, George. I don't mind. It's true. It's totally true. It's just my Liberal friends get grumpy when you do. But I'm trying to persuade them, because everybody's just looking for something to jump on, and we're here now so they can jump on us. Okay,
Exactly.
Sticking with Wales, we've got our Councillor James Ball from up North Wales. He's going to
Bravo.
have a chat with us now. I'm going to ask you to unmute there, James.
Hello, Tess. Hello, George.
Bravo,
Evening,
Councillor. Welcome
comrades.
on board.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Absolute honour.
Thank
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more what you just said, George, about Blythe and the cul-de-sac of nationalism. So I'm Councillor James Ball up here in North Wales. I'm not Welsh, I'm English, but I've lived here all my adult life. I represent one of one of the top 10 most deprived wards in Wales. Unfortunately, Rhyl is a town of two halves. You've got the more affluent half, and you've got the very left behind, poor working class half, which I'm in. It's a Labour lockout town, has been for decades, which hasn't helped anybody here, to be honest. And we have the poorest, the most deprived ward in the whole of Wales, just over the train tracks from me, Rhyl West. So yeah, I was asked to sort of say tell people what it's like being a councillor at these times, a community councillor. For anyone that's thinking of standing and is standing, I might want to know a bit more, basically. Well, to be honest, I've felt you're on the front line, because after 40 years of neoliberalism, particularly the last 10 years under the schizophrenic sort of Tory party governance, we all know social services, we all know the welfare state as far as the safety net of the benefit system, we all know that work itself and pay aren't there. They're not there to help anybody. So if you're running to be a councillor, if you become a councillor, you are, basically. It's like any job, it's what you make it, to be honest. There's lots of councillors who spend a lot of time sitting on their well-cushioned behinds, drawing down their pay around here and not doing anything. But obviously I've taken a different approach. So you'll be doing a lot of things like literally bread and butter work, helping people get food on the table, working families who are in poverty pay, or have had to go onto universal credit, who literally can't make ends meet, can't put food on the family for their food on the table for their families, can't pay the bills. For example, I spent the last 4 days trying to help one of my residents who's disabled get rid of can't get rid of it, but try and help him with a huge council tax bill that's been dumped on him. that he'll never be able to pay, and there's no one else there to help. The usual institutions that are there, the citizen advice and things like that. I don't know where you are in the country. Where I am, are just not working. So it's a very, very important role. It can be difficult, but then that's why we've got our comrades and people like me and everybody else to sort of support each other in the Workers' Party. I recommend it to anybody who wants to try and do it, particularly if you're like me. I have been to university now, but if you're like me and you came out of school with nothing, you're working class, you worked, you don't, perhaps don't think you haven't got the education that you're supposed to have, they'll tell you're supposed to have, ignore all that, just go for it and do what you can do.
Bravo, brilliant. Most welcome, James, really. You're a breakthrough for us, and we hope that you'll be joined by many more in the years to come, because there's no doubt the prestige of elected office gives you a certain something. It gives you a position in public opinion, a certain audience that it's difficult to get without being in elected office. So we intend to not only be councillors, but be the best councillors, like you've been. Be the most assiduous, the most dedicated, the best informed, and the hardest working councillors of all, because we'll be carrying not just our own reputation into these offices, but the hopes of thousands of people associated with the Workers' Party of Britain. And so everyone who goes for these offices has to be absolutely determined. They have to be unimpeachable in their conduct, and they have to be absolutely determined to be the best councillor that they can be. Thanks, James, very much indeed.
Yeah, really inspiring, George. And thanks, James. Really nice to hear you talk about what it's like, and really lovely as well to hear you talk, helping individual people. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. And also, I'd trust a councillor with 3 guitars, especially if one's a Telecaster. Okay, right. We have Claire Stranack next. Our lovely Claire, motes teacher. Can you unmute there, doll?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Claire, welcome.
Okay, thanks very much. Schools in England return on the 8th of March, which is, I think, a cause for concern, but also a cause for celebration. It's just such a dark place, isn't it? And such an unequal place as well. And so the kinds of students that desperately need to be in school, hopefully safely, physically, the ones that need to be in school are the ones from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, obviously. Because not only we're talking about a 40% gap in their attainment even before they start school. And I think that that's disrespectful to people's families. And I think you've got to take that, with a certain kind of caveat. It's really about the opportunities that they have for literacy and numeracy that are helped by the structure of being in school. There doesn't seem to be, and that's vitally important, probably for the younger ones rather than for the secondary school students. But what do we have with capitalism? What we have with our education system and capitalism is potentially a crisis, but there's opportunity within that crisis, isn't there? But opportunity for them means our money, our public money being siphoned off into private hands under the guise, as they've done with the health service, under the guise of helping students to catch up, whatever that means, for the time that they've missed school. So the Tories have appointed a czar whose background, he says, is in teaching and education, but really it's the private sector. When you look into the groups that he's been associated with, it's with the private sector. Terrifying. It's this, we just accept this culture now that our money becomes their money. And then they sell us back products. Things that sound fantastic, like research and homeschool. I'm talking about school, the education system. And as teachers, you know it's not going to work. Nothing works better than staff, whether that's the health service, whether that's a train, or whether it's school. It's us, highly trained, highly professional, highly committed. And don't they do a number on you if you see it as a vocation? You know, if you're not just in it for the wage, but you want it to be something more than that, then they just have you over a barrel then. And so that's a grave concern to me, that here we go again. Not only the money's being siphoned off, and by the way, there's no need, because we've already suggested just have a windfall tax on those with private wealth of more than 10 million, and we'd raise 17 billion. There's your money. Forget raising council tax, forget raising income tax. No, just do a windfall tax. We've budgeted for that. We understand that. It's not, you know, complex, as if they will though, as if they will. So not only is that a grave concern, and me knowing, if you don't mind, that sounds so egotistical, but just knowing it won't work, because you need small class sizes like they have in the private sector. Why do they send their children to the private sector? Because they have small class sizes. They have resources. Oh, it's not about the money. Of course it's about the money. It's about your time with that student. It's about the extracurricular activities that they need. We talk about something like a kind of culture gap. I hate the way that's spoken about. And we've addressed this in the party, haven't we? The way we look down, we have to be very careful about looking down on working class culture. And I accept that. But we still have to understand that many of our students don't go to libraries, don't go to live performances, don't go to theatre, don't go for trips. Come on. You know, the stuff that we take for granted. And we should be taking for granted as part of their education, their all-round education. What do? We stop them doing art, we stop them doing music, we stop all that because we have to push them and train them for exams. And what's the Labour Party suggesting? Summer schools, the efficacy of which is not even being examined, but we actually know they don't work. Anything that sounds like, oh, you know, that's a good idea. People spending, you know, more money and teachers being more, having their working conditions eroded even further. It always sounds good. It isn't, trust me. And the Labour Party have said, no strikes. Sorry. You know, back off. As we've said, please don't fund the Labour Party. They're not on our side. If you were ever in any doubt about that, it's a lonely position, but it's also the true position that we cannot rely on them at all. The unions have got to look after their members, and it's got to be away from the Labour Party. And in my area, teachers have got to stop seeing themselves as some sort of branch of social work or almost quasi-religious. Get on strike if they're going to erode your paying conditions. Because you know what? You're no different from somebody who is getting hired and fired on garbage contracts in the gas industry, you know, in telecoms. There's no difference. Stop seeing yourself as being different from other workers. You're not. You'll get shafted like they are very soon. Okay, thanks for the chance to speak. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. I couldn't improve on that. I won't try to, Tess. I just pick up only one of Claire's many excellent points, and it is to underscore what I said earlier. It is simply unconscionable for unions to give money to a party that is openly encouraging government attacks on the living standards, the wages and conditions of their own members. I mean, this would be called fraud in any other context, to pay the person who's stealing from you, stealing your conditions, stealing your wages, stealing your prestige and your importance in the public's mind. To pay them money is unconscionable. Now, the teachers' unions don't pay them money, of course, but in my experience, they still harbor the same illusions that Labour is the party for them, that Labour will come to their rescue. That was never true, and it sure ain't true now under Farmer Starmer. So get wise, get out of the Labour Party and stop funding it and stop holding illusions in it.
That's right, run away. Thank you, Claire. Fantastic contribution, as always. We'll be hearing a lot more from Claire, I'm sure. So, well, we've run out of time, unfortunately. It's gone really quickly tonight. Thank you to all our contributors. Thank you so much to everyone who's still waiting. We'll be straight to you first up next week. Thank you, George. Thanks to everyone who's been here and listened. Good night. God bless everyone. Night, night.
Welcome.